It was just a peaceful portrait, until you see what's in the maid's hand. Jennifer Walsh had spent the better part of a gray March morning in 2024 browsing through boxes of old photographs at a sprawling estate sale in the suburbs of Atlanta. The Hendricks family was liquidating the contents of their ancestral home, a Victorian mansion that had stood since 1887, and Jennifer, a historian specializing in post-Reconstruction Southern history, couldn't resist the opportunity to search for hidden gems. Most of the photographs were predictable. Stiff formal portraits, faded wedding pictures, children in elaborate period clothing staring solemnly at the camera. Jennifer had examined hundreds of similar images over her 15-year career at Emory University, where she taught courses on Southern labor history and race relations. Then, tucked between two landscape paintings in a box marked miscellaneous estate items, she found a large format photograph in an ornate gilt frame. The image showed a wealthy family posed in an elaborately decorated parlor. Jennifer recognized the photographic style immediately. Album and print, probably from the mid-1890s, based on the clothing and interior decoration. The family consisted of 5 people arranged in the formal composition, typical of the era. A stern-faced man in his 50s sat in an upholstered chair at the center, his posture rigid, his expression conveying authority. Beside him stood a woman of similar age, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, wearing an elaborate dark dress with fashionable sleeves. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ranging in age from about 10 to 16, completed the grouping. The parlor itself spoke of wealth. Patterned wallpaper, heavy curtains, ornate furniture, and various decorative objects arranged on tables and mantels. Everything conveyed respectability, prosperity, and social standing. But what caught Jennifer's attention was a figure in the background, almost peripheral to the main composition. A black woman, probably in her 30s, stood near a side table in the rear left of the frame. Unlike the family members who were clearly posing, this woman appeared to be in the middle of work, her body angled slightly away from the camera, her attention seemingly on something she was arranging on the table. She wore a plain dark dress with a white apron, the standard uniform of a domestic servant. Her hair was pulled back severely, covered partially by a white cap. While the family stared directly at the camera with studied seriousness, this woman seemed almost incidental to the scene. Jennifer turned the frame over. On the backing, in faded ink, someone had written, "The Caldwell Family, Atlanta Residence, March 14, 1895. She purchased the photograph for $40. Back in her office at Emory University the following Monday, Jennifer carefully removed the photograph from its frame. The backing was brittle with age, and she worked slowly to preserve both the image and any potential historical information. Behind the main photograph, she found a studio card from J.M. Harrison, a prominent Atlanta photographer. Jennifer placed the photograph on her light table and began her standard examination process. She pulled out her magnifying glass and started with the family members, studying their clothing, jewelry, and expressions for clues about their social status and the photograph's precise dating. Everything confirmed her initial assessment of 1895, give or take a year. Then she moved her attention to the background figure, the domestic worker. The woman's face was less clearly defined than the family's, probably because she hadn't been the photographer's primary focus. But Jennifer could still make out her features. A strong face, neither young nor old, with an expression that was difficult to read. Jennifer's eyes traveled down to the woman's hands. One hand rested on the edge of the side table. The other hand, partially obscured by her white apron, seemed to be holding something. Jennifer adjusted her magnifying glass, trying to see more clearly. There was definitely an object in the woman's hand, but the detail was insufficient for identification. Jennifer moved to her desk and began the process of creating a high-resolution digital scan. She used a specialized scanner designed for fragile historical photographs. 40 minutes later, she opened the digital file on her computer. The scanning technology was remarkable. It could reveal details invisible to the naked eye, capturing subtle variations in tone and contrast. Jennifer zoomed in on the background figure, enhancing the resolution until the woman's form filled her screen. She adjusted the contrast and brightness, bringing out details that had been hidden in shadow for more than a century. And there it was. In the woman's left hand, partially concealed in the folds of her white apron but unmistakable once properly illuminated, was a small metal object. Jennifer zoomed in further, her pulse quickening as the shape became clear. A key. The woman was holding a key. It wasn't large, perhaps 2 or 3 inches long, the kind that might open a desk drawer or cabinet. But why would a domestic servant be holding a key during a formal family photograph? Why would she have it concealed in her apron? Jennifer sat back in her chair, staring at the image. Something about this felt intentional. The woman's posture seemed purposeful. There was tension in her body language. She searched for information about the Caldwell family of Atlanta and found Marcus Caldwell, one of Atlanta's most prominent businessmen in the 1890s. Marcus Caldwell had been one of Atlanta's most prominent businessmen in the 1890s. Born in 1843, he had built his fortune in the chaotic years of Reconstruction that followed the Civil War. The family owned extensive landholdings outside Atlanta, operated several businesses in the city, and maintained the kind of social position that warranted formal family portraits by expensive photographers. Jennifer found references to the Caldwell family in newspaper archives, city directories, and historical society records. Marcus Caldwell had served on various civic boards. His wife, Eleanor, had been active in ladies' charitable organizations, and their children had attended the best schools available to white Southerners of their class. But as Jennifer dug deeper, she found information that cast a different light on the family's prosperity. An article from 1896 in a small reform-minded newspaper called The Southern Advocate mentioned Marcus Caldwell in connection with labor practices on his rural properties. The article was brief and carefully worded, but it referenced concerns about the treatment of Negro laborers and questions regarding the voluntary nature of work contracts. Jennifer knew exactly what those euphemisms meant. In the 1890s, South, a system called peonage had emerged as a way to maintain a captive black labor force after slavery's legal end. Under this system, black workers would be arrested on minor or fabricated charges, fined amounts they couldn't pay, and then offered the option of working off their debt. The system was technically illegal. The 13th Amendment had abolished slavery and involuntary servitude, but Southern states enforced it through biased courts, corrupt sheriffs, and the threat of violence. Thousands of black Americans were trapped in peonage well into the 20th century. Jennifer pulled up more sources, cross-referencing Caldwell's name with federal investigations into peonage. In 1895, there had been a brief federal inquiry into labor practices in Georgia. The investigation had been largely ineffective, but the records had been preserved in the National Archives. She found a reference to Caldwell in a report dated April 1895. Investigation into labor practices at Caldwell properties outside Atlanta suspended due to lack of witness cooperation. Several potential witnesses failed to appear for scheduled testimony, citing fear of retaliation. April 1895. 1 month after the photograph had been taken, Jennifer's mind raced. She pulled up the digital image again, zooming in on the woman in the background, the woman holding a key. What if she hadn't been just a domestic servant going about routine household tasks? What if she had been doing something far more dangerous? She needed more information about the federal investigation. She needed to know what had happened in March and April of 1895. And most importantly, she needed to discover the identity of the woman in the photograph. Jennifer reached for her phone and called Dr. Marcus Reed at Howard University. Dr. Marcus Reed arrived in Atlanta 3 days later, his research materials packed in 2 large bags. At 65, Marcus had dedicated his entire career to uncovering the hidden histories of black labor exploitation in the South. His definitive book on peonage systems remained the standard academic reference on the subject. Jennifer met him at her office early Thursday morning. She had the Caldwell photograph displayed on her large monitor. The image zoomed to show the woman in the background with the key visible in her hand. Marcus studied the image in silence for several minutes, occasionally asking Jennifer to zoom in on different details. He examined the woman's posture, her positioning relative to the family, the way her hand concealed the key while still holding it ready. "Tell me what you found so far," he said finally. Jennifer walked him through her research, the Caldwell family's wealth and social position, the newspaper references to questionable labor practices, the federal investigation in 1895, and the timing of the photograph, taken exactly 1 month before the investigation was suspended. Marcus nodded slowly. The Caldwells were typical of a certain class of Southern businessmen. They presented themselves as respectable pillars of the community while profiting from slavery in everything but name. He pointed to the photograph. And this formal portrait was part of that presentation. Expensive furniture, clothing, the very fact of hiring a professional photographer. This was meant to be a public statement of status. But the woman in the background? Jennifer prompted. Yes, she's the anomaly. Marcus zoomed in on her face. Domestic servants were sometimes included in family photographs, usually standing very formally. But this woman isn't posed. She's working, or appearing to work. And that key, that's what makes this extraordinary. He opened his laptop and pulled up his research files. In 1895, there was a coordinated effort by federal investigators to document peonage operations in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. The effort was led by a Justice Department attorney named Samuel Price. Price was unusual. He actually cared about enforcing the 13th Amendment. Marcus found a document and displayed it. Price's investigation strategy relied on gathering documentary evidence, contracts, ledgers, correspondence, because witness testimony alone was too easily dismissed. He needed papers that proved the system existed. But getting those documents would be nearly impossible, Jennifer said. Exactly, which is why Price relied on informants, people who had access to the records and were willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Marcus looked at the photograph again. People like the woman in this picture. Jennifer felt her understanding crystallizing. You think she was collecting evidence for the federal investigation? I think it's very possible. That key gave her access to something. Probably the private office where Caldwell kept his business papers. Finding the identity of the woman in the photograph proved challenging. Domestic servants in wealthy white households were rarely documented by name in official records, and when they were mentioned, it was usually only in the most minimal way, just a position with no personal details. Jennifer and Marcus started with Marcus Caldwell's household records, hoping to find employment ledgers or payment records that might list domestic staff. The Caldwell family papers had been donated to the Atlanta History Center in the 1960s, and Jennifer requested access to the collection. 2 days later, She sat in the History Center's reading room with several boxes of Caldwell documents spread before her. Most were business correspondence, legal papers, and social invitations. But in a box labeled Household Accounts, 1890-1900, she found what she was looking for. A leather-bound ledger recorded household expenses, including wages paid to domestic staff. The entries were sparse, just names, positions, and monthly wages. But there, in the March 1895 entries, Jennifer found Esther Williams, housemaid, $4 per month. Esther! The woman finally had a name. Jennifer photographed the page and continued searching. She found Esther's name in earlier ledgers going back to 1892, always listed as housemaid, with the same minimal wage. There were no other details, no age, no home address, nothing personal. But Marcus had another idea. If Esther was working with Samuel Price's investigation, there might be records in the Justice Department files. Price kept detailed notes about his informants, though he used coded language to protect their identities. They submitted a request to the National Archives for Price's investigative files related to Georgia. The documents arrived as digital scans a week later, hundreds of pages of reports, correspondence, witness statements, and personal notes. Jennifer and Marcus divided the files and began reading. Most of Price's reports were frustratingly vague about his sources, referring to a reliable informant or a person with access to relevant documents without providing names. This had been necessary. If the documents fell into the wrong hands, Price didn't want to expose the people helping him. But in Price's personal notebook, which had apparently never been intended for official files, they found more specific information. An entry dated March 10th, 1895, read, "Met today with E.W., domestic servant in the Caldwell household. She reports that Marcus Caldwell maintains detailed records of labor contracts at his rural properties, including evidence of debt manipulation and forced labor. E.W. has access to Caldwell's private office and believes she can obtain copies of key documents. I have provided her with specific items to look for. E.W. understands the danger, but insists on proceeding. Her courage is remarkable." Jennifer felt her heart racing. E.W. Esther Williams. This is her? She was Price's informant. Marcus was already reading ahead in the notebook. Look at this entry from March 15th. One day after the Caldwell photograph was taken, E.W. successfully obtained access to Caldwell's files yesterday evening. She copied several contracts and a ledger showing systematic debt inflation. The evidence is damning. However, E.W. reports that she believes Caldwell may be growing suspicious. She noticed him watching her more closely than usual. I have advised extreme caution, but E.W. insists there are additional documents we need. She will attempt to access these within the week. She was gathering evidence the same week the photograph was taken, Jennifer said. That key she's holding? She must have used it to get into Caldwell's office. They continued reading through Price's notes. Over the following weeks, in March 1895, Esther had provided Price with increasingly damaging evidence. Contracts that showed workers being charged for their own food, housing, and tools at inflated prices, ensuring their debts never decreased. Correspondence between Caldwell and other property owners discussing how to prevent workers from leaving. Letters to local law enforcement requesting the arrest of specific black men on fabricated charges. It was a comprehensive system of exploitation, documented in the perpetrator's own words. And Esther had risked everything to expose it. Then, on March 30th, 1895, Price's tone shifted dramatically. I have received word that E.W. has disappeared. She failed to appear for our scheduled meeting yesterday, and inquiries suggest she left the Caldwell household suddenly 3 days ago. I fear the worst. Caldwell may have discovered her activities. I am attempting to determine her whereabouts and ensure her safety. Jennifer and Marcus sat in heavy silence, staring at the words on the screen. She disappeared, Jennifer finally said. Right after providing all that evidence, she vanished. Marcus's expression was grim. The question is whether she disappeared because she fled to safety or because Caldwell silenced her. Jennifer felt sick. This woman, Esther Williams, had stood in that parlor on March 14th, 1895, posing as nothing more than a servant while secretly holding the key to her employer's crimes. Within 2 weeks, she had vanished. We have to find out what happened to her, Jennifer said. Marcus searched through records from the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Atlanta, looking for any mention of Esther. He found a letter from April 1895 from Reverend Thomas Shaw to the bishop in Philadelphia. I write to inform you of a delicate situation. A member of our congregation who aided federal authorities has been forced to flee Atlanta for her safety. With the help of trusted members, she has been moved to a safe location. I request the church's assistance in relocating her to a northern city. The woman's name is Esther Williams, age 32. She got out, Jennifer breathed. She escaped before Caldwell could do anything to her. Marcus searched through AME church records in northern cities. The denomination had a strong tradition of helping black Southerners relocate to escape persecution. In the records of Mother Bethel, AME Church in Philadelphia, they found what they were looking for. A membership roster from May 1895 listed Esther Williams, age 32, relocated from Atlanta, Georgia, assisted by Reverend Shaw. Philadelphia, Marcus said. The church helped her get all the way to Philadelphia. They pulled up Philadelphia city directories and census records. In the 1900 census, they found her. Esther Williams, female, Negro, age 37, washerwoman, residing at 512 Lombard Street. Jennifer felt overwhelming relief. Esther had survived. She had escaped Atlanta, started over in Philadelphia, and was alive at least as of 1900. But what had happened to the investigation she had risked everything to support? Marcus returned to Samuel Price's files. After Esther's disappearance, Price's notes showed increasing frustration. Several other potential witnesses had backed out, clearly frightened by what had happened to Esther, but Price had pressed forward with the evidence Esther had provided. In late April 1895, Price had submitted a formal report to the Justice Department documenting the Caldwell operation and recommending criminal prosecution. The report included copies of the documents Esther had obtained, contracts, ledgers, and correspondence proving systematic labor exploitation. Then they found the Justice Department's response, dated May 15, 1895. After careful review of the evidence submitted regarding Marcus Caldwell and associated parties, the department has determined that prosecution is not warranted at this time. While certain labor practices may raise concerns, the contracts in question appear to have been entered voluntarily. The investigation is hereby closed. Jennifer felt anger rising in her chest. They had documentation of crimes and they did nothing? This was typical, Marcus said quietly. The federal government was never fully committed to enforcing the 13th Amendment in the South. Price tried, but he was operating in a system designed to protect men like Caldwell. They found more entries in Price's personal notebook. The department has abandoned these people. The evidence is irrefutable, but politics and power triumph over justice. E.W. Risked her life to obtain proof of systematic enslavement, and we have failed her. Marcus pulled up newspaper archives from Atlanta. In late 1895 and early 1896, articles mentioned Caldwell's business difficulties. Workers had left his properties, and he struggled to find replacements. Other businessmen appeared to be distancing themselves from him. One editorial from January 1896 made veiled references to certain prominent citizens whose labor practices have come under federal scrutiny, leading to questions about their character. The investigation might have been officially closed, Marcus said, but the exposure damaged Caldwell's reputation. By 1900, Marcus Caldwell's wealth had significantly diminished. He died in 1903, his obituary mentioning business reversals in his final years. Jennifer and Marcus continued tracing Esther's life in Philadelphia, piecing together her story from city directories, church records, and census data. What emerged was a portrait of remarkable resilience. The 1900 census showed Esther working as a washerwoman, hard physical labor that provided barely subsistence income. She lived in a boarding house in Philadelphia's 7th Ward, where many Southern migrants had settled. By 1905, city directories listed her differently. Esther Williams, seamstress and laundress, 628 South Street. She had moved to a slightly better address and expanded her work to include sewing and alterations, which required skill and commanded higher wages. Church records from Mother Bethel AME showed Esther had become an active member. A notation from 1907 described her as a woman of strong faith and quiet courage, dedicated to helping others in need. That phrase, helping others in need, led Jennifer to investigate further. She found references in church meeting minutes to a women's aid society that Esther had helped establish in 1908. The society's purpose was to assist black women who had recently arrived from the South. She was doing for others what the church had done for her, Marcus observed, creating a network to help people escape Southern persecution. They found more evidence of Esther's activities in the Philadelphia Tribune, a black community newspaper. An article from 1910 mentioned Mrs. Esther Williams, whose charitable work with newly arrived migrants has provided essential support to dozens of families. The 1910 census provided more detail. Esther, now 47, owned a small house on Lombard Street and listed her occupation as dressmaker. Living with her were two young women, ages 19 and 22, both listed as boarders with a notation indicating they were recently arrived from Georgia. She was taking in refugees, Jennifer said, women escaping the same kind of situations she had escaped from. Marcus pulled up more newspaper references. Over the following years, Esther's name appeared periodically in articles about charitable work, church activities, and community organizing. She had clearly become a respected figure in Philadelphia's black community. In 1918, the Tribune published a feature about community leaders supporting black soldiers returning from World War I. Esther was interviewed. Mrs. Williams, who came to Philadelphia from Georgia more than 20 years ago, has dedicated her life to helping others find freedom and opportunity. When asked what motivates her work, she replied, "I know what it means to escape from those who would keep you in bondage. I'm just returning what was given to me." Jennifer felt tears welling up. Esther had never forgotten what she'd endured, and she had spent the rest of her life helping others do the same. They found Esther in the 1920 census, age 57, still living in her small house, still taking in boarders. The 1930 census showed her, at age 67, retired but still active in church work. The final record was a death certificate from 1934. Esther Williams had died at age 71 in Philadelphia. Jennifer spent the next 6 months developing an exhibition for the Atlanta History Center titled The Key to Freedom, Esther Williams, and the Fight Against Peonage. She worked with museum designers, other historians, and community advisors to create a comprehensive presentation of Esther's story in the broader context of peonage in the post-Reconstruction South. The centerpiece was the 1895 Caldwell family photograph, now understood in its full context. Museum visitors would see first the formal portrait as it appeared originally, a wealthy family posing in their elaborate parlor. But then, through interactive technology, they could zoom in on details, eventually discovering Esther in the background and the key in her hand. Adjacent displays explained who Esther was, what she had done, and what had happened afterward. The exhibition included documents she had helped obtain, the contracts and correspondence that proved the Caldwell operation's criminality. It showed Samuel Price's notes describing her courage. It traced her escape to Philadelphia and her decades of community work. But Jennifer insisted the exhibition also address the broader history of peonage, showing that Esther's story wasn't unique. Hundreds of thousands of Black Americans had been trapped in forced labor systems after slavery's legal end. The exhibition included testimony from peonage survivors, photographs of labor camps, and documentation of the violence used to maintain the system. Marcus wrote an essay for the exhibition catalog. Esther Williams represents thousands of unsung heroes who risked everything to fight injustice during one of America's darkest periods. Her courage wasn't rewarded with immediate justice. The man she exposed faced no legal consequences. But her actions mattered. She freed herself. She preserved evidence that historians can now use, and she spent her life ensuring others would have the same chance at freedom. That is a legacy worth remembering. The exhibition opened on a warm evening in September 2024. More than 400 people attended, including scholars, community activists, local politicians, and descendants of peonage survivors. Jennifer had also invited members of Philadelphia's Mother Bethel AME Church, where Esther had worshipped. Reverend Sarah Johnson, the current pastor of Mother Bethel, spoke at the opening. Sister Williams was known in our congregation as a quiet woman of deep faith and remarkable generosity. But we didn't know the full story of her courage until Dr. Walsh's research brought it to light. Learning what she survived makes her decades of service even more meaningful. She wasn't just helping people, she was continuing the fight she'd started in Atlanta. A local activist named James Wright, whose great-grandfather had been trapped in a peonage operation in Alabama, spoke about contemporary relevance. This isn't just history. The exploitation of black labor, the use of the legal system to trap people, these patterns persist in different forms today. Esther Williams' story reminds us that resistance is always possible. 1 year after Jennifer's initial discovery, the Caldwell family photograph had become one of the most recognized historical images in discussions of post-Reconstruction Southern history. Museums across the country requested permission to include it in exhibitions about Black resistance, labor history, and civil rights. But for Jennifer, the image's significance remained deeply personal. She kept a copy of the photograph on her office wall and often found herself staring at Esther's partially visible figure, thinking about the courage it had taken to stand in that room, surrounded by wealth built on exploitation, secretly holding the key to destroying it all. She thought about the moment the photograph was taken, March 14, 1895. The Caldwell family had posed formally, confident in their power, completely unaware that the woman working quietly in the background was about to dismantle their operation. And for 129 years, the photograph had been viewed, when it was viewed at all, as simply a portrait of a wealthy Southern family. Esther had remained invisible, her courage unrecognized, her story untold, until someone looked closely enough to see what had always been there. Jennifer received a letter one afternoon from a high school student in Alabama named Jayla Washington. Dear Dr. Walsh, I learned about Esther Williams in my history class this year. We studied the photograph and talked about peonage and resistance. I never knew any of this history before. My school mostly teaches about slavery ending in 1865, and then we skip forward to the civil rights movement. Learning about Esther changed how I understand American history. It made me realize how much is hidden or left out of the stories we're told. I'm writing a research paper about my own family history now, trying to find the stories that haven't been told. Thank you for discovering Esther's story and making sure people know about her. Jennifer pinned the letter to her bulletin board next to the photograph. This, she thought, was why the work mattered. Not just for the academic contribution, but because stories like Esther's changed how people understood the past and their connection to it. Marcus stopped by her office late one afternoon as she was preparing for a lecture. He looked at the photograph on her wall and smiled. Do you ever think about what Esther would say if she knew her story was finally being told? Jennifer considered the question. I think she'd be surprised. Everything we know about her suggests she wasn't seeking recognition. She did what she believed was right, then spent the rest of her life quietly helping others. She didn't leave memoirs. She just lived her values. Which makes her story even more important to tell, Marcus said. She represents all the people who resisted injustice without expecting recognition, who fought battles no one witnessed. For every Esther Williams whose story we've recovered, there are thousands whose names we'll never know. But their actions still mattered, Jennifer said. Even if we can't name them all, we can honor them by telling the stories we do find and by acknowledging that resistance was widespread even when it was invisible. That evening, Jennifer gave a public lecture about Esther's story. The auditorium was packed. She walked the audience through the discovery, finding the photograph, noticing the key, researching the Caldwell family, connecting Esther to Samuel Price's investigation, tracing her life in Philadelphia. After the lecture, an elderly black woman approached. "My name is Dorothy Miller. I'm 86, and my family is from Georgia. My grandfather never talked much about his early life, but he did tell us that his mother had worked for a white family in Atlanta and had gotten into trouble that forced her to leave suddenly. After hearing your talk tonight, I believe that woman might have been Esther Williams." Jennifer's heart raced. They spent an hour comparing family histories. The timeline matched. Dorothy's grandfather had been born in Atlanta in 1890 and moved to Philadelphia with his mother in 1895. As Jennifer drove home that night, she thought about how one photograph, one moment captured more than a century ago, had opened a window into an entire hidden world. She thought about Esther standing in that parlor, holding a key, making a choice that would change not just her own life, but countless others. And she thought about all the other photographs sitting in archives and attics, waiting for someone to look closely enough. How many other Esthers were hidden in the backgrounds of images, their courage unrecognized? Esther Williams had held a key in her hand on March 14, 1895. That key had opened a door to freedom, for herself, for the people she helped. And now, 130 years later, for everyone who learned her story and understood that courage is always possible. The photograph had kept her secret for 129 years, but now the secret was revealed, and Esther's legacy of resistance would inspire generations to come.